before we get started on this our note sheet, finishing this note sheet up, are there any questions over the homework? Question on any of the homework problems? And what we're doing today is finishing up our note sheet over dividing polynomial functions using long division. Now the start is setting the problem up. So we have our division symbol with log division. We put the symbol or our expression after the division sign outside, so our x squared minus x plus 1. And we put our other expression inside. And if there are any terms missing, such as our x to the third or x cubed, because we had x to the fourth, which means we need an x to the third, x squared, x in our constant, we added in with 0. So we do have our x to the fourth. Since we were missing the x cubed term, we put it in as plus 0x cubed. Then we have our plus 2x squared minus x plus 5. Now, that brings us to the first step with solving this here. We need to cancel out the far left term first and then move to the right. And to do that, we need to see what times x squared will give us x to the fourth. And that would be x squared. Because we need x squared and x to the fourth to be the same, so we can cancel them out. So we're going to multiply our x squared minus x plus 1 by our x squared. And we could do that off to the side. Distribute that out and then place it underneath. So the first thing we're going to do is x squared times x squared, which is our x to the fourth. X squared times negative x is negative x cubed. And x squared times 1 is plus x squared. And we can place it underneath this here. So we'd have x to the fourth minus x cubed plus x squared. And once we have this set up, we subtract. And the first one we're subtracting is x to the fourth minus x to the fourth is 0. 0x cubed minus negative x cubed. All the negative and negative would make a plus. 0 plus x, or 0 plus 1 is just 1. So we have our x cubed or 1x cubed. 2x squared minus x squared is going to be plus x squared. And then our next step is to bring down the negative x. Questions on this here? And now again, at this point here, we repeat the process, what we just did. We do the same steps over again. But this time we're trying to see what times x squared will give us x cubed. The x. So we have plus x, because we don't need it to go from positive to negative, it's still positive. So we have plus x. There's those extra lines. And we do the process again. Now we're going to multiply our x squared minus x plus 1 by our x. We're going to distribute this here. X times x squared is x cubed. X times negative x is negative x squared. And x times 1 is plus x. So underneath this here, we would have x cubed minus x squared plus x. And again, just like in the previous step, we're going to subtract. Our x cubed minus x cubed, again, is 0, just like we wanted. X squared minus negative x squared Negative and negative make a plus. X squared plus x squared is 2x squared. And negative x minus x is negative 2x. And then we bring down our plus 5. Questions on this here? Now we repeat the process again and say, what do we need to multiply our x squared by to give us 2x squared? We need to multiply it by 2. And since it's a positive 2, we would say plus 2. Because our x squared times 2 would indeed give us 2x squared, which is exactly what we wanted. So we'd have 2 times our x squared minus x plus 1. And again, we're going to distribute 2 times x squared is 2x squared. 2 times negative x would be negative 2x. And 2 times 1 is plus 2. And again, we're going to subtract 2x squared minus 2x squared. 2 minus 2 is 0. They will cancel each other out. Negative 2x minus negative 2x. Well, the negative and negative make a plus. So negative 2 plus 2 is 0. And 5 minus 2 is 3. So this time the remainder is just 3. And what we do with the remainder is we add it on to the end of our answer. And we do 3 over what we've been dividing this by, which is our x squared minus x plus 1. And that there is our final answer. Questions on this here? Still feel pretty good with this so far. I know this is new. And as I've said with some of the other classes, it is a lot of steps and not a lot of steps all at the same time, because it's the same set of steps, just repeated. But any other questions on this here? Let's go on and do this one here and then one more. And then you'll have the rest of the time to work on the assignment. So outside the parentheses, we'll have x squared minus x minus 4. Inside the parentheses, our term, our variable with the biggest exponent is x to the 5th, which means inside we need the 5th power, 4th power, 3rd, 2nd, 1st, and constant. And we actually have all those. So we have this pretty decent size polynomial expression. We do have every term inside and outside. And again, the first thing we need to do is see what times x squared will give us 2x to the 5th, so those will cancel. 2x cubed, because we know we will need a 2, and x cubed times x squared does give us x to the 5th. Now, kind of a shortcut to get there is if we look at how many terms we have here. Well, I have 3, and if I go over 3, the third term is our x cubed, which means our starting variable should be x cubed. But that also tells us that the next variable when we multiply after x cubed should be x squared. The one after that should have an x, and the one after that should be a constant term. It kind of gives us a pattern to follow. So for our first one, we're doing 2x cubed. Off to the side of scratch work, we can do 2x cubed times our x squared minus x minus 4. 2x cubed times x squared is 2x to the 5th. 2x cubed times negative x is negative 2x to the 4th. And 2x cubed times negative 4 is negative 8x cubed. And again, we're going to come over and line this up. 2x to the 5th minus 2x to the 4th minus 8x cubed. And just like before, we're going to subtract. Our 2x to the 5th minus 2x to the 5th is indeed 0. X to the 4th minus negative 2x to the 4th. Negative and negative make a plus, giving us 3x to the 4th. Negative 15x cubed minus negative 8x cubed. Negative and negative would make a plus. Negative 15 plus 8 would be negative 7x cubed. And lastly, in this first part, we would bring down the negative 2x squared. Now in our next step, we need to see what times x squared will give us negative 3, or give us 3x to the 4th, not negative. Well, the number in front of our x squared is 1, so we do know that we'll need a positive 3. Well, x squared times x squared is indeed x to the 4th. So the next thing we're going to multiply is 3x squared. So our 3x squared is going to be multiplied with our x squared minus x minus 4. 3x squared times x squared is 3x to the 4th. 3x squared times negative x is negative 3x cubed. And 3x squared times negative 4 is negative 3x squared. And again, just like with the one before it, we're going to subtract. 3x to the 4th minus 3x to the 4th is 0. Negative 7x cubed minus negative 3x cubed. The negative and negative make a plus. Negative 7 plus 3 is negative 4 x cubed. Negative 2x squared minus negative 12x squared. Negative and negative make a plus. Negative 2x squared plus 12x squared is positive 10x squared. Then our next step would bring down the 10x. And we repeat this process again. We need to see what times x squared would give us negative 4x cubed. We'll need a negative 4 to turn it from 1 to negative 4. And we need an x to turn it from x squared to x cubed. So we're going to repeat the process, this time with negative 4x. And we distribute this here. Negative 4x times x squared is negative 4x cubed. Negative 4x times negative x is plus 4x squared. And negative 4x times negative 4 is plus 16x. And again, we're going to subtract. Negative 4x cubed minus negative 4x cubed. Negative, negative make a plus, giving us negative 4 plus 4, which is 0. Yes. 10x squared minus 4x squared. 10 minus 4 is x squared. Yes. 10x minus 16x would be negative 6x. And lastly, the last number we're bringing down is our minus 24. Last time we have to do this step. What times x squared gives us 6x squared? Almost. Just 6. Because we already have the x squared, so we just need 6. And if we notice, once we figure out our first variable's term, x cubed, the next one's x squared, x constant. And if we multiply this by 6, 6 times x squared gives us 6x squared. 6 times negative x gives us negative 6, and 6 times negative 4 is negative 24. And we can put that underneath. And lastly, we're going to subtract. 6x squared minus 6x squared is negative 6x minus negative 6. Negative, negative make a plus. Negative 6 plus 6 is 0. Negative 24 minus negative 24. Negative, negative make a positive. It would indeed give us 0. So that tells us the remainder for this is 0, which means that's our final answer. We don't have to do anything else to it. That is it. Because if we added the remainder to it, all we would be adding, let's get this color. It would just be plus 0 over our x squared minus x minus 4. But whenever we have 0 over the top of a fraction, the whole thing is 0, so it's not adding anything to it. We don't need the remainder part. We only add the remainder if the numerator is something other than just 0. Questions on this here? This is the last one we're going to look at. And this one here is going to take less steps than the previous one. Inside our division, the first term is going to be x to the 4th. Our next term should have an x to the 3rd. And since it does not, we have to add in 0x to the 3rd. Then we have our plus 4x squared. We don't have an x term, so it's plus 0x minus 45. Outside, we do have x squared plus 0x plus 9. If we have a term missing in either spot, or any of the spots, we need to add it in as 0. Now this one does behave a little differently than the ones we've seen so far. And we'll see what we have to do with it. But the first step is still the same. We need to see what times x squared gives us x to the 4th. And that is just x squared. And off to the side, like we've been doing for our scratch work, we're going to multiply x squared by our x squared plus 0x plus 9. If we distribute this here, x squared times x squared is x to the 4th plus x squared times 0x, we will have 0 x cubed. Even though that is 0, we're going to have it hold its place so we don't add unlike terms. And our x squared times 9 is 9x squared. And then put it underneath our corresponding terms. At this point here, we're going to subtract. X to the fourth minus x to the fourth is 0. 0x cubed minus 0x cubed, 0. So we can cross this out. Second hour's video, I did go through what we would do if we left it as 0x cubed. We don't have to, we can just cross it out. 4x squared minus 9x squared. 4 minus 9 is negative 5x squared. And just like with the previous ones before, we can bring down our 0x. Now when we bring this down, leave a highlighter. How many terms do we have here? We have 2 terms. How many terms do we have? Okay, apparently it's just with you. No matter what I do. Highlighter, please. There we go. How many terms do we have here? We don't have enough terms down below what we're dividing, do we? So whenever we have more terms down here than we do up here, all that means that we have to do is bring a second term down. So instead of just bringing down the negative 0, that means we'll do is also bring down the negative 45. Since we didn't have enough terms there, we brought 2 down. Now let's see what's going to happen. Because our next step would be what times x squared is negative 5x squared. Negative 5. And we can put this over the negative 45. Now if you notice, we didn't put it over the 0x because, well, it doesn't have an x. It doesn't need one. We actually don't have a term for that spot. Because if we did, it would be plus 0x. And to do that, we would have had to have left the 0x cubed. And it makes things a little more challenging. But at this point, we can multiply through by negative 5. And if we distribute this negative 5, you would have negative 5x squared plus 0x minus 45. And last but not least, we can subtract. Negative 5x squared minus 5x squared is 0. 0x minus 0x. Negative 45 minus negative 45. 0. So our answer is x squared minus 5. And that's it. If we want to rewrite it so that it's a little bit closer together, we can. Say x squared minus 5. That works also. Questions on this here? And if we did multiply these two back together, we would get back to x to the fourth plus 4x squared minus 45. Now, the whole goal of doing division with polynomials is to decrease the degree, because this started out as a degree 4 and ended up as a degree 2. And for all the ways that we know how to solve polynomial functions, well, we only know how to solve ones that are degree 2 or quadratics with our quadratic formula. Because if it's higher than that, we need to learn other ways, and we will. But a lot of them is going to be revolving around getting the degree from whatever it is down to a degree 2 or smaller and solving from there. If I remember right, I believe it's page 187. Problems 5 through 10. I do know it's problems 5 through 10. I'm just trying to remember what page number it is. But for the most part, the page number doesn't matter because you are given to it It is indeed 187. So page 187, problems 5 through 10.